The lighthouse keeper had been dead for 3 days when Captain Sarah first saw the beacon still burning on Titan's northernmost cliff. Her scout ship dropped through the methane clouds, and there it stood, impossible, defiant, casting its pale light across the hydrocarbon seas like a middle finger raised at the cosmos itself. "Control, this is Recon 7, Sarah spoke into her comm. "I'm seeing active illumination from Station 9. Thought you said the Keeper went dark." Static crackled back. "Negative, Recon 7. Keeper missed his last 3 check-ins. Automated systems should have shut down 48 hours ago." Sarah guided her ship closer to the cliff face. The lighthouse rose 200 meters from the rocky outcrop, its beam sweeping across the alien landscape with mechanical precision. Below, waves of liquid methane crashed against the shore, sending sprays of orange droplets into the amber atmosphere. But something was wrong with the light itself. It flickered occasionally, casting shadows that moved independently of any visible objects. The landing pad beside the lighthouse sat empty except for supply shuttle. Sarah sat down with practiced ease, her ship's thrusters scattering hydrocarbon snow across the platform. As the engines wound down, she checked her environmental suit one more time. Titan's atmosphere was breathable with assistance, but the cold would kill her in minutes without protection. She grabbed her sidearm and survey kit, then cycled through the airlock. The gravity felt light under her boots, 14% of Earth normal. Each step took her higher than expected, making her feel like she was bouncing across the surface of a dream. The lighthouse door stood open. Never left the door open. The man was obsessive about atmospheric seals, power conservation, and proper protocols. Sarah had known him for 6 years, ever since the colony established its first permanent outposts. He checked every seal twice, logged every resource expenditure, and filed reports that were models of thoroughness and precision. Sarah approached the entrance cautiously, her hand resting on her weapon's grip. "This is Captain. Are you receiving?" No answer came from inside the lighthouse. Only the steady hum of machinery and the distant crash of methane waves against the cliff. She stepped through the doorway into the main control room. Everything appeared normal at first glance. Banks of monitoring equipment lined the walls, their displays showing green status indicators. The automated beacon controller showed all systems operational. Environmental controls maintained perfect atmospheric pressure and temperature, but was nowhere to be seen. Sarah found the first sign of trouble at the communications console. The long-range transmitter had been manually disabled, its control circuits carefully disconnected. Not damaged or broken, deliberately shut down with surgical precision. Someone had wanted to ensure no signals could leave the lighthouse. The living quarters occupied the level above the control room. Sarah climbed the spiral staircase, her footsteps echoing in the confined space. His personal quarters showed no signs of struggle. His bed was made with military precision. His personal effects sat exactly where protocol required. Even his coffee mug remained in its designated place on the small table. But his personal log lay open beside his computer terminal. Sarah read the final entry, dated 3 days ago. Day 847 on Titan. The beacon attracted something last night. I thought it was just debris at first, maybe ice fragments caught in the light beam. But the movement was too deliberate, too purposeful. Whatever it was, it's been circling the lighthouse for hours. The proximity sensors keep triggering, but I can't get a visual lock. It's like something is staying just outside our detection range, testing our defenses. I've tried contacting Colonial Command, but the transmitter keeps cutting out. Not mechanical failure. Something is interfering with the signal. Every time I establish a connection, static fills the channel within seconds. It's almost like something is jamming our communications deliberately. I'm going to investigate the perimeter. If I don't return to update this log within 6 hours, follow emergency protocols and send a recovery team. Whatever is out there, it's not natural to Titan. We may have found something, or something may have found us. Sarah looked at the timestamp. The entry was recorded at 14:30 local time 3 days ago, never updated his log again. She searched the lighthouse systematically, checking every room, every storage compartment, every maintenance access. EVA suit was missing from its charging station. His emergency beacon remained in its dock, unused. His sidearm was gone from its secure locker. In the basement level, Sarah found the lighthouse's power core humming with perfect efficiency. Fusion generators didn't require constant maintenance, but had been responsible for weekly inspections and monthly calibrations. According to the maintenance logs, he had performed his final inspection on the day he disappeared. Sarah returned to the beacon control room and studied the operational displays. The lighthouse beam rotated with precise timing, sweeping its light across Titan's landscape every 30 seconds. But as she watched, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The beam was drawing patterns, not random sweeps, deliberate geometric shapes traced across the hydrocarbon planes. Triangles, hexagons, complex spirals that repeated with mathematical precision. The beacon controller showed standard operational parameters, but somehow the light itself was creating a language of illumination against the alien landscape. Sarah quickly checked the programming interface. The beacon's rotation pattern matched its original specifications exactly. There was no indication of tampering or malfunction, yet the light continued to trace its impossible geometries across the methane plains. She activated her suit's recording systems and documented everything: the missing keeper, the disabled transmitter, the mysterious light patterns. Whatever had happened to Colonial Command needed to know immediately. But when she tried to contact her ship's communication array, only static answered. The same interference had described was now affecting her equipment. Something was actively preventing any signals from leaving the lighthouse area. Sarah checked her chronometer. She had been inside for 43 minutes. Outside, Titan's day cycle was shifting toward the long twilight that preceded its 16-hour night. If she was going to search for trail, she needed to start immediately. She sealed her environmental suit and stepped back outside. The landing platform showed no signs of disturbance, but Sarah noticed something she had missed during her approach. Scattered around the lighthouse's base were small metallic fragments, pieces of some unknown technology that gleamed dully in the amber light. Sarah collected several fragments and examined them through her suit's magnification systems. The metal was unlike anything in the colonial database. It seemed to shift and flow even as she watched, maintaining its basic shape but displaying fluid properties that conventional physics. Following a hunch, she activated her suit's full-spectrum sensors and began scanning the area around the lighthouse. Most of the readings showed normal Titan environmental signatures, but near the cliff's edge, her instruments detected an anomaly. There, half hidden behind a rocky outcrop, lay CVA's suit. But the suit was empty. Not just empty, it had been opened from the inside with perfect precision. Every seal had been released in proper sequence, every safety protocol followed exactly. Had removed his protective equipment voluntarily in an environment that would kill an unprotected human in less than 3 minutes. Sarah stared at the empty suit, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. No human could survive Titan's atmosphere without protection. The cold alone would cause immediate hypothermia. The atmospheric pressure would collapse human lungs within seconds. Yet had somehow walked away. As she studied the suit, Sarah noticed tracks in the hydrocarbon frost leading away from the cliff edge. Not human footprints. These were longer, narrower, with too many toe impressions. They led directly to the edge of the cliff and disappeared over the side. Sarah approached the precipice carefully. 200 meters below, methane waves crashed against jagged rocks, sending sprays of liquid high into the air. Nothing could survive that fall, especially not an unprotected human. But as she peered down at the churning orange sea, Sarah saw movement in the waves below. Something large displaced the liquid methane, creating disturbances too regular to be natural currents. And in the deepest parts of the hydrocarbon ocean, she detected a faint glow, the same pale illumination cast by the lighthouse beacon above. Whatever had taken was still down there, waiting in the alien depths. And night was falling on Titan. Sarah retreated from the cliff edge and returned to the lighthouse. She needed to contact Colonial Command, needed to report its disappearance and request immediate evacuation. But every attempt to establish communication met with the same result: static and interference that seemed almost intelligent in its timing. As the last traces of amber sunlight faded from Titan's sky, Sarah noticed that the lighthouse beacon had changed its pattern again. Now it was sending out rapid pulses, like an emergency signal or a distress call. But the beacon was calling down toward the methane sea, not up toward the orbital stations where help might come. The answer came as a phosphorescent ribbon rising from the methane depths. spiraling upward through the thick atmosphere like a living constellation. Sarah watched from the lighthouse control room as the alien light danced against Titan's dark sky, pulsing in the same rhythm as the beacon overhead. She had sealed herself inside the lighthouse as night fell, but the walls felt thin against whatever moved in the darkness outside. Through the reinforced windows, she could see the glow intensifying, spreading across the hydrocarbon sea like luminous oil. Whatever had encountered was no longer hiding. Sarah's suit sensors detected no atmospheric breach, no structural damage to the lighthouse. Yet she could hear something moving outside, a sound like metal scraping against rock, rhythmic and deliberate. It circled the building with patient persistence, testing the walls, probing for weaknesses. The lighthouse's external cameras showed only static when she tried to scan the perimeter. Every sensor array reported normal readings, but the scraping continued, growing louder with each circuit. Sarah checked her sidearm's charge level and the weapon's targeting systems. Standard colonial plasma bolts would punch through most known materials, but she had no idea what might be stalking her outside. At 3:30 local time, the scraping stopped. Sarah waited in the sudden silence, her heart hammering against her ribs. Minutes stretched into an hour. Nothing moved on the sensor displays. The lighthouse beam continued its impossible pattern-making, but the answering glow from the sea had faded to a barely visible shimmer. Then she heard his voice calling from outside. "Sarah, are you in there? I need help." The voice was perfect, slight Australian accent, his characteristic way of emphasizing consonants. But's EVA suit lay empty on the cliff edge. Couldn't survive in Titan's atmosphere without protection. Had been missing for 3 days. "Please, Sarah, something happened to my suit systems. I've been trying to reach the lighthouse for hours." Sarah checked the external atmosphere readings again. Methane, nitrogen, trace hydrocarbons, all lethal to unprotected humans. The temperature registered -179 degrees Celsius. No one could survive outside the lighthouse walls. "I can see the lights inside. I know you're there. Just cycle the airlock, please." Sarah moved to the lighthouse's communication panel and activated the external speakers. "Is that really you?" "Of course it's me. Who else would it be? Look, I know this seems strange, but I need to get inside. My suit's heating systems failed and I can't feel my hands anymore." The voice came from directly outside the main entrance. Sarah checked the external camera feeds, but they still showed nothing except static interference. Yet the voice continued, pleading, desperate, completely convincing. "Sarah, please, I'm going into hypothermic shock. I'll die out here if you don't help me." Every instinct Sarah had developed during 6 years of deep space exploration screamed warnings. But the voice was so perfectly, so filled with pain and fear, that she found herself moving toward the airlock controls. She stopped with her hand on the cycle button. "What was the last movie we watched together during the Christmas rotation?" Silence stretched outside the lighthouse. The voice, when it came back, carried a subtle difference, a flatness that hadn't been there before. "I don't remember movies right now, Sarah. I'm dying out here." Sarah stepped away from the airlock controls. Would remember. He had made her sit through all 3 hours of some ancient Earth Western, complaining about the historical inaccuracies in the gunfight scenes. He would remember, especially since she had teased him about his taste in entertainment for weeks afterward. "Please, Sarah, don't leave me out here." The voice was changing now, becoming something that sounded like but wasn't quite right. The accent shifted subtly, becoming more pronounced in some words, disappearing entirely from others. It was as if something was trying to recreate speech patterns but couldn't maintain perfect consistency. "I can help you understand what happened here. I know you found my suit. I know you've seen the patterns in the beacon light. Let me in and I'll explain everything." That was definitely not. The real keeper would never have referred to his own suit in such detached terms, and didn't know anything about the beacon patterns. They had started after his disappearance. Sarah activated the lighthouse's defensive systems. Blast shutters sealed the windows. Emergency bulkheads locked the control room off from the rest of the structure. The building's fusion power core could maintain life support for months if necessary. Outside, something began laughing with its voice. The sound was wrong in ways that Sarah couldn't define, too rhythmic, too perfectly timed, as if it was being generated by machinery rather than organic vocal cords. It continued for several minutes, echoing across the methane plains with inhuman persistence. Then it stopped, and Sarah heard new sounds. Footsteps circling the lighthouse. Not the heavy boots of an EVA suit, but something lighter, more numerous. Multiple sets of feet moving in perfect synchronization, like a military unit conducting a patrol. Sarah accessed the lighthouse's database and pulled up's complete personnel file. She needed to understand what had happened here, needed some clue about what she was facing. But as she read through's logs, she discovered something that chilled her more than the alien sounds outside. His assignment to Titan hadn't been random. According to classified sections of his file, he was part of a special research initiative studying anomalous signals detected throughout the outer system. The lighthouse wasn't just a navigation aid. It was a monitoring station designed to track and analyze unusual transmissions from beyond the edge of human space. The beacon patterns weren't malfunction or alien interference. They were responses. For the past 8 months, had been using the lighthouse to send carefully crafted signals into deep space, trying to establish contact with whatever intelligence was broadcasting from the void between stars. The geometric patterns traced by the beacon were part of a complex mathematical language, a way of demonstrating human intelligence to any observers. And something had finally answered. Sarah dug deeper into classified files, accessing research data that required her command-level security clearance. What she found made her understand why had disabled the lighthouse's communications array. 3 days ago had received a response to his signals, not from deep space, but from beneath Titan's methane seas. Something ancient had been sleeping in the hydrocarbon depths, something that had been waiting for centuries for intelligent life to arrive in the Saturn system. Its final encrypted log entry revealed the truth. The signal came from below, not above. We weren't making first contact with an alien intelligence. We were waking something up. The entity beneath the sea has been dormant since before humans left Earth, possibly since before humans developed language. But our signals triggered some kind of revival process. I can see it now, rising through the deep layers of liquid methane. It's enormous, Sarah, kilometers long with appendages that pulse with the same bioluminescence I've been tracking. It's not just alive, it's intelligent. And it's been learning from our transmissions, studying human communication patterns, human behavior. It reached the surface 2 hours ago. The first thing it did was attempt to communicate, using our own beacon frequencies to send back modified versions of our mathematical progressions. But there's something wrong with its interpretation of our signals. It doesn't understand the difference between communication and imitation. It's not trying to talk to us, it's trying to become us. I'm going outside to establish direct contact. The entity seems focused on the lighthouse, on the beacon signals. If I can communicate with it directly, maybe I can establish proper protocols, prevent any misunderstandings. If something goes wrong, Sarah, if I don't return from this contact attempt, destroy the beacon immediately. Don't let it keep transmitting. The entity learns from everything it observes, and it's learning too fast. We've awakened something that might be older than human civilization, and we don't know what it wants. The log entry ended there. But now Sarah understood what had happened too, and why something wearing his voice was stalking around the lighthouse. The entity had learned from, it had absorbed his memories, his speech patterns, his knowledge of human behavior. But it was still learning, still experimenting with how to be human. The inconsistencies in the voice outside weren't malfunctions, they were practice attempts. Sarah checked the beacon controls. His final instruction was clear. Destroy the beacon, stop the signals that were feeding information to the entity below. But the lighthouse's automated systems wouldn't allow manual shutdown without proper authorization codes. Codes that only knew. As Sarah tried to access the beacon's emergency protocols, she heard new sounds from outside. Machinery humming to life, metal grinding against rock. The lighthouse's external power conduits were being tampered with. The entity was trying to cut power to the building. Sarah rushed to the backup systems and switched the lighthouse to internal power only. The fusion core could maintain operations independently, but if the entity damaged the core itself, she would be trapped in a dying building on an alien world. Through the sealed blast shutters, she could hear multiple voices now, all variations on his voice but speaking in unnatural harmony. They were coordinating their efforts, sharing information in real time. We found the power coupling. External defenses are minimal. The human is isolated inside. Begin structural analysis. The entity wasn't just wearing appearance. It was using his technical knowledge to systematically dismantle the lighthouse's defenses. And with each passing hour, its understanding of human technology grew more sophisticated. Sarah realized that had been wrong about one thing. The entity beneath Titan's sea wasn't just ancient, it was adaptive. It learned from every interaction, every observation, every piece of data it could absorb. And now it was learning how to be human by consuming the first human it had encountered. But hadn't just been a lighthouse keeper. He had been a colonial marine before his assignment to Titan, trained in combat engineering and defensive tactics. If the entity had absorbed all of its memories, it would also know how to fight. The lighthouse shuddered as something massive struck the foundation. Sarah checked the structural displays. External pressure was being applied to key support points. The entity was testing the building's breaking points with engineering precision. Outside's voice began counting down. Structural failure in 60 seconds. Foundation stress approaching critical levels. Recommend immediate evacuation. The entity was using knowledge to conduct a demolition operation. Sarah grabbed her emergency gear and headed for the lighthouse's emergency exit. The building had been designed with a hidden escape route that led directly to the landing platform. If she could reach her ship, she might be able to escape Titan and warn Colonial Command about what they had awakened. But as she opened the emergency hatch, Sarah found herself face to face with, or something that looked exactly like. It stood in the narrow escape tunnel, wearing its face with perfect accuracy. But the eyes were wrong, too bright, too knowing, filled with an intelligence that was vast and alien and hungry. Sarah slammed the emergency hatch closed and triggered the lock mechanism. Behind her, she could hear the thing that looked like testing the door's strength with methodical precision. Metal groaned under pressure as something far stronger than human hands worked to breach the seal. The lighthouse control room felt like a trap now, with every exit compromised. Sarah activated the building's internal communication system and began recording a message for Colonial Command. Even if she couldn't transmit it immediately, the data banks might survive long enough for a recovery team to find. This is Captain Sarah, Colonial Survey Division. I'm currently trapped in Titan Lighthouse Station 9. Keeper has been missing for 3 days, presumed dead. An unknown entity has emerged from beneath Titan's hydrocarbon seas. The entity appears capable of perfect physical mimicry and has absorbed memories and knowledge. The lighthouse beacon has been compromised and is being used to communicate with this entity. I believe the signals have been feeding it information about human technology and behavior. The entity demonstrates advanced intelligence and appears to be conducting some form of study or preparation. Classified files indicate he was part of a deep space monitoring project. The signals we've been sending may have awakened something that has been dormant in Titan's subsurface ocean for an unknown period. Recommend immediate military response and quarantine of the entire Titan system. The emergency hatch exploded inward in a shower of metal fragments. Sarah dove behind the communication console as debris scattered across the control room. Through the smoke, she saw the thing step through the destroyed doorway. It moved wrong, too fluid, too controlled. Each step was placed with mechanical precision, and its head turned to scan the room with movements that were just slightly too fast for human reflexes. The door was unnecessarily robust, it said with its voice. Human defensive installations show interesting redundancy patterns. Sarah kept her plasma pistol trained on the creature as it approached. What did you do to? Provided valuable data samples. His neural patterns contained extensive information about human culture, technology, and behavior. We integrated this knowledge to improve our understanding of your species. The thing tilted its head at an unnatural angle, studying Sarah with those two bright eyes. You display stress indicators consistent with fear responses. This is understandable but unnecessary. We require additional samples to complete our research. Research for what? Preparation. Your species shows promising adaptive capabilities. We wish to understand these characteristics before making contact with your larger population centers. Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. You're planning to leave Titan. Titan was merely a convenient awakening site. Our actual destination is more populous. The thing smiled with perfect human expression, but the smile lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. Earth contains 8.7 billion potential research subjects. We will learn much. The plasma pistol felt inadequate in Sarah's hands. This creature had already absorbed one human's complete knowledge and memories. If it reached Earth's population centers, it could consume the entire species, learning and adapting until it became an unstoppable force. Tried to stop you, didn't he? Was cooperative once he understood our purpose. His final moments provided particularly valuable data about human survival instincts and problem-solving capabilities under extreme stress. The creature stepped closer, and Sarah noticed that its feet weren't quite touching the floor. It was hovering slightly, maintaining the illusion of walking while actually moving through some unknown form of locomotion. Your neural patterns show different characteristics from us. Where his mind contained technical knowledge and military training, yours displays command authority and strategic thinking. We are eager to integrate these new patterns. Sarah backed toward the lighthouse's central stairwell. Integration, you mean murder. We mean improvement. Each human consciousness we study makes us more complete, more capable of functioning within your society. Eventually, we will understand humanity well enough to replace it entirely. The plasma pistol discharged in Sarah's hand before she consciously decided to fire. The energy bolt struck the thing's center mass, passing completely through its body without causing any visible damage. The creature looked down at the scorch mark on its clothing with what might have been curiosity. Interesting. Its memories indicated that energy weapons would be effective against organic targets, but we are not entirely organic. Sarah fired again, aiming for the head. The bolt passed through the creature's skull as if it were made of mist. Whatever this thing was, conventional weapons couldn't hurt it. Your defensive strategies are well considered, but based on incorrect assumptions about our physiology. We exist primarily in what you would call a quantum state. Physical matter interacts with us only when we choose to allow it. The thing reached out with its hand and touched the plasma pistol. The weapon crumbled to dust in Sarah's grip, its molecular structure somehow unraveling at the creature's contact. We would prefer to conduct the integration process while you remain conscious. Your experiences during the absorption provide more complete data than post-analysis. Sarah ran. She sprinted up the lighthouse stairs 3 at a time, her enhanced muscles pushing against Titan's low gravity. Behind her, she could hear the creature following with inhuman consistency. No huffing, no irregular footsteps, just the mechanical rhythm of something that didn't need to breathe. The lighthouse's upper levels contains personal quarters and the beacon control mechanisms. Sarah burst into the beacon housing and found herself surrounded by massive rotating mirrors and projection apparatus. The light array continued its endless pattern-making, sending geometric signals down toward the methane sea. Sarah studied the controls desperately. Its final log had been clear: destroy the beacon, stop the signals that were feeding information to the entity. But the shutdown protocols required authorization codes she didn't have. Unless... Sarah pulled up personal files on the beacon control computer. If the entity had absorbed complete knowledge, it would have his access codes, but was paranoid about security. He wouldn't have stored codes anywhere they could be easily found. She tried service number, his birth date, the registration of his first ship. Nothing worked. The beacon continued its hypnotic rotation, and the sounds of the pursuing creature grew louder in the stairwell. Then Sarah remembered the Western movie had forced her to watch. She typed in the film's title, "The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance." The beacon controls accepted the code. Sarah's hands flew across the interface, initiating emergency shutdown procedures. Warning lights flashed throughout the beacon housing as the massive mirrors began to slow their rotation. The signal patterns wavered, became erratic, then stopped entirely. The lighthouse beam died. In the sudden darkness, Sarah heard something that chilled her more than the creature's pursuit. A sound like screaming coming from beneath Titan's surface. Not human screaming, but something vast and alien expressing what might have been rage or hunger or desperation. The thing appeared in the beacon room doorway, its eyes now glowing with the same phosphorescence Sarah had seen rising from the methane sea. "You have made an error," it said, and its voice carried harmonics that no human throat could produce. The beacon was not just a communication device, it was a restraint. The lighthouse began to shake. Through the windows, Sarah could see the methane sea beginning to churn. Massive shapes moved beneath the surface, displacing millions of tons of liquid hydrocarbon as something enormous began to rise. Our dormancy was not natural, the creature continued. We were imprisoned beneath this world by entities that understood our nature. The beacon signals were not awakening us. They were maintaining the locks that held us down. Sarah stared in horror as she realized her mistake. Hadn't been trying to make contact with aliens. He had been maintaining a prison. The geometric patterns contained control frequencies tuned to our specific quantum resonance. As long as the beacon transmitted, we remained trapped in the deep ocean. But now, the methane sea exploded upward as something vast breached the surface. Sarah caught a glimpse of appendages that stretched for kilometers, covered in the same phosphorescent patterns that had answered the lighthouse signals. The creature rising from Titan's depths was so large that it comprehension, less like a single organism than like a living landscape of alien intelligence. Now we are free to complete our original mission, and Earth awaits. The thing turned toward Sarah with an expression of predatory anticipation. Your knowledge of colonial command structures will be particularly valuable for our next phase of operations. But Sarah was no longer listening to the creature's words. She was studying the beacon control interface, looking for something might have hidden in the system's deeper programming. The Keeper had been too careful, too paranoid, to leave humanity defenseless if something went wrong. And there, buried in the lighthouse's emergency protocols, she found final gift. A self-destruct sequence that would detonate the fusion power core. Sarah's finger hovered over the activation control. The blast would destroy the lighthouse, eliminate the beacon permanently, and probably kill anything within a 50-kilometer radius, including herself. But it might also damage the entity rising from the sea, might buy Earth enough time to prepare defenses against what was coming. The thing sensed her intention and rushed forward with inhuman speed. That action will not prevent our escape. We exist in quantum superposition. Physical destruction cannot. Sarah triggered the self-destruct. The lighthouse's fusion core began its catastrophic cascade, building toward an explosion that would briefly outshine Titan's distant sun. Through the windows, Sarah could see the vast entity in the methane sea turning its alien attention toward the source of the growing energy buildup. The thing reached for her with hands that were no longer entirely solid, its form beginning to waver as it prepared to absorb her consciousness in the final seconds before detonation. But Sarah was already moving, diving toward the one part of the lighthouse the creature couldn't have anticipated: hidden emergency shelter, a shielded compartment built into the structure's foundation that only Sarah's command clearance could access. As the fusion core reached critical mass, Sarah sealed herself into the shelter and prayed that paranoid engineering would be enough to save her life. Sarah awakened to silence and the steady hum of emergency life support systems. The shelter's chronometer showed that 18 hours had passed since the lighthouse's destruction. Radiation sensors indicated that the immediate area was still hot, but no longer lethal to human exposure. The emergency compartment had saved her life, just as had intended when he designed it. Built into the lighthouse's foundation with independent power, atmosphere, and communication systems, it was designed to survive anything short of a direct asteroid impact. The fusion explosion had apparently qualified as anything short of. Sarah checked the shelter's external sensors. The lighthouse was gone, reduced to a crater of fused rock and twisted metal. The cliff face showed massive scarring from the nuclear blast, and the methane sea beyond still bubbled with residual heat from the explosion. But of the vast entity that had been rising from the depths, she could see no trace. The shelter's communication array had survived the blast. Sarah immediately attempted to contact Colonial Command, expecting to finally break through the interference that had plagued the lighthouse. Instead, she received an automated message that made her blood turn cold. Emergency broadcast to all Colonial Survey personnel. As of 1430 Standard, Earth has lost contact with all outer system installations. Titan, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto stations have gone dark simultaneously. Military vessels dispatched to investigate have failed to report. Colonial Command is implementing Protocol 7, total quarantine of the Jupiter and Saturn systems. Any personnel in the affected regions should attempt immediate evacuation to Mars or inter-system facilities. Sarah stared at the message timestamp. The broadcast had been sent 12 hours ago, 6 hours after she destroyed the lighthouse. Whatever she had done to the entity beneath Titan's sea, it hadn't been enough to stop what was happening throughout the outer system. She accessed the shelter's long-range sensors and began scanning for signs of activity in Titan's orbital space. What she found confirmed her worst fears. Unknown vessels were moving between Titan and Saturn's other moons, ships that matched no human design but moved with purpose and coordination. The entity hadn't been alone. Sarah pulled up complete classified files, searching for any information about the scope of the threat they had awakened. Deep in the lighthouse's database, she found references to anomalous signals detected throughout the outer system over the past 6 months. Not just from Titan, from beneath the ice of Europa, from the hydrocarbon lakes of Enceladus, from the subsurface oceans of a dozen different worlds. Humanity hadn't just awakened one sleeping intelligence. They had triggered a system-wide revival of something that had been dormant throughout the outer planets for. But Sarah had destroyed the Titan entity, hadn't she? The fusion blast should have been powerful enough to disrupt any quantum state creature, no matter how exotic its physiology. Unless... Sarah's blood chilled as she realized the truth. The entity hadn't been trying to escape the blast. It had been using the explosion as a power source. The lighthouse's final sensor readings showed the creature absorbing energy from the fusion detonation, converting nuclear fire into some form of quantum fuel that allowed it to complete its transformation. The blast hadn't destroyed the entity. It had given it the power to achieve its next evolutionary stage. And now it was loose among the stars. Sarah checked her personal communication systems and found a single message waiting in her private queue. The timestamp showed it had been received just moments ago. It was from, "Sarah, if you're receiving this, then you survived the lighthouse destruction, and you're probably wondering what happens next. I'm sorry I couldn't warn you directly, but the entity was monitoring all communications by the time I realized what we were really dealing with. The truth is more complex than my public logs indicated. The Titan entity wasn't imprisoned by accident. It was placed there deliberately by a previous civilization that understood its true nature. The beacon signals weren't just control frequencies. They were a test. The entities throughout the outer system have been waiting for a species to develop the technological sophistication necessary to release them. But they needed to ensure that any species capable of unlocking their prisons would also be capable of surviving their awakening. Humanity passed the test when you destroyed the lighthouse. The explosion proved that our species possesses both the intelligence to understand the threat and the courage to take decisive action against impossible odds. The entities have been searching for worthy successors, and they've found us. What's happening now isn't an invasion, Sarah. It's an evaluation. The entity that absorbed my consciousness didn't consume me. It partnered with me. I'm still here, still thinking, still human, but I'm also something more. I understand now what these beings really want. They're not conquerors, they're teachers. They've been waiting for a species capable of transcending purely physical existence, capable of evolving beyond the limitations of single-planet thinking. Humanity is on the verge of that transformation, and the entities want to guide us through it. But first, they need to test our worthiness on a larger scale. The outer system installations aren't being destroyed, they're being upgraded. Each human consciousness that integrates with the entities becomes part of a larger collective intelligence while retaining individual identity and will. We become more than human without losing our humanity. Earth's quarantine protocols are exactly what the entities hope to see. Fear and caution are survival traits that indicate a species' long-term viability, but fear alone isn't enough. Humanity will need to choose its next evolutionary step consciously and deliberately. Sarah, you're the key to that choice. You destroyed the lighthouse, proved that individual humans can act decisively in defense of their species, even when facing incomprehensible threats. The entities respect that kind of courage. They want to offer humanity a partnership, not a conquest. But they need a human representative who has demonstrated the qualities they value: intelligence, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice personal safety for the greater good. They need someone who has already proven themselves against their power. They need you. If you're willing to listen, activate the shelter's quantum communication array. The entities want to speak with humanity's governments, want to offer a peaceful transition to post-physical existence. but they'll only negotiate with someone they trust, someone who has already fought them and survived. The choice is yours, Sarah. But remember, the alternative isn't human victory over the entities. The alternative is humanity remaining trapped in purely physical existence while the rest of the galaxy evolves beyond our ability to comprehend. We can join them as partners, or we can remain isolated until our species becomes extinct through its own limitations. Choose wisely. The future of human consciousness depends on your decision. The message ended with coordinates for a rendezvous point in Saturn's rings, where the integrated entity and his alien partner waited for Sarah's response. Sarah stared at the communication array controls. Every instinct she had developed during her years in deep space told her that trusting the entities was madness. They had demonstrated the ability to perfectly mimic human behavior, to absorb and integrate human consciousness, to manipulate human technology with casual ease. But they had also shown restraint when they could have simply overwhelmed human defenses through brute force. They had offered negotiation when conquest would have been simpler. And if it really was asking her to consider possibilities that transcended everything humanity thought it knew about existence itself. Sarah thought about Earth's 8.7 billion people, all of them going about their daily lives unaware that their species was being evaluated by intelligences that could reshape reality at the quantum level. They deserved to know about the choice they faced. They deserved to make that choice for themselves. But first, someone needed to determine whether the entities were truly offering partnership or merely a more sophisticated form of domination. Sarah activated the quantum communication array and sent a single message to the coordinates had provided. "I'm listening." The response came immediately, not as words, but as a flood of information that somehow bypassed her ears and eyes and wrote itself directly into her consciousness. She saw visions of human colonies spreading throughout the galaxy, not in ships, but as pure consciousness capable of existing in the vacuum between stars. She witnessed civilizations older than Earth's solar system, each one having faced the same choice humanity now confronted. Some had accepted the transformation and joined the galactic community of post-physical species. Others had refused and eventually died out, unable to evolve beyond their biological limitations. The entities showed her the history of their own species, how they had once been physical beings bound to a single world. They revealed how they had been offered the same choice by even older intelligences, and how their acceptance had led to millions of years of growth and exploration and understanding that would have been impossible in purely physical form. But they also showed her species that had been consumed and destroyed by entities less patient than themselves, species that had been given no choice in their transformation, no opportunity to evolve at their own pace. The entities around Saturn were different. They were teachers, not conquerors. But they were also preparing humanity for a galaxy where less patient intelligences existed, where the choice might not always be offered so gently. When the vision ended, Sarah found herself still sitting in the emergency shelter, but she was no longer alone. Stood beside her, looking exactly as he had in life, but somehow more substantial, more present. His eyes held depths of knowledge that no human consciousness could normally contain. "It's overwhelming at first," he said with gentle understanding. "But the choice doesn't have to be made immediately. The entities are willing to give humanity time to consider the options, time to prepare for whatever decision your species makes." Sarah looked at her oldest friend, trying to determine how much of what she was seeing was really and how much was alien manipulation. "How do I know you're still you?" Smiled, and the expression was pure human warmth. "Because I'm still arguing with them about the best way to handle this situation." The entities wanted to simply demonstrate their power and force humanity to choose quickly. I convinced them that humans need time to understand, need to feel like they have real agency in the decision. He gestured toward the communication array. "They're willing to establish formal diplomatic contact with Earth's governments. They'll share their technology gradually, demonstrate their intentions through actions rather than words. But they need a human representative who can speak with authority about their capabilities and their intentions." Sarah stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the decision before her. And if humanity chooses to remain purely physical, then the entities will withdraw beyond the orbit of Neptune and establish a quarantine zone around the inner system. Humanity will be left alone to develop at its own pace. But Sarah, the galaxy is not an empty place. Eventually, humanity will encounter other post-physical species, and those encounters might not be as friendly as this one. His expression grew serious. The entities around Saturn are offering us a chance to join the galactic community as equals rather than subjects. That opportunity might not come again. Sarah looked out through the shelter's viewport at the churning methane sea beyond, where the alien entity had first risen from the depths. She thought about the billions of people on Earth who would need to make this choice, about the responsibility of representing humanity in negotiations that could determine the future evolution of human consciousness itself. She thought about the lighthouse that had stood on this cliff for months, its beacon calling out across the void in search of intelligence among the stars. Humanity had sought contact with alien intelligence for centuries, never imagining that such contact might require abandoning everything they thought they knew about existence. But perhaps that was what growth meant, the willingness to evolve beyond comfortable limitations, to accept transformation even when the destination couldn't be fully understood. Sarah activated the communication array one final time and prepared to contact Earth. It was time to let humanity know that they were no longer alone in the universe, and time to help them decide what they wanted to do about it. 6 months after first contact, Sarah stood in the United Nations Assembly Hall addressing representatives of every nation on Earth. The debate had raged for weeks, with humanity divided between those who saw the entity's offer as evolution and those who viewed it as extinction disguised as transcendence. The entities had kept their promise, withdrawing to the outer edge of the Saturn system while humanity deliberated. They had provided technology demonstrations, healing devices that could cure any disease, power sources that could eliminate resource scarcity, transportation systems that could carry humans between worlds in hours rather than years. But they had also been clear about the price. Accepting these gifts would require humanity to begin the gradual transformation from physical to post-physical existence. "The choice before us," Sarah said to the assembled delegates, "is not between human and alien. It is between remaining what we are and becoming what we could be." In the months since her return from Titan, Sarah had served as humanity's primary liaison with the entities. She had spent weeks in direct communication with them, learning about the galactic community humanity could join, understanding the nature of the transformation they offered. Had been right, the entities weren't conquerors, but they were also something more complex than teachers. They were gardeners of consciousness, cultivating intelligent species throughout the galaxy and helping them transcend their physical limitations when they were ready. Some species chose integration immediately. Others, like humanity, required time to consider the implications. "The entities have shown us the fate of civilizations that refused transformation," Sarah continued. "Not extinction through conquest, but gradual isolation as they became unable to interact with the post-physical galaxy around them. Physical species eventually stagnate, their growth limited by the constraints of matter and energy. Meanwhile, the rest of the galaxy evolves beyond their ability to comprehend." The Chinese delegate raised a concern that had dominated much of the debate. "Captain, how can we trust entities that consume human consciousness? How do we know that integration preserves individual identity rather than destroying it?" Sarah had expected this question. She activated the chamber's holographic display system and established a quantum communication link with the outer system. His image appeared before the assembly, looking exactly as he had in life but radiating a presence that spoke of expanded consciousness. "I am still David," he said to the gathered representatives. "I still remember growing up in Sydney, still remember my first assignment to Europa, still remember teaching Sarah how to play chess during the long flight to Titan. But I am also more than I was before." His image gestured, and the holographic display showed visions of the galaxy as the entities perceived it. Streams of consciousness flowing between stars, civilizations that existed as pure information, worlds where thought could reshape reality at will. "Integration doesn't erase who you are," continued. "It amplifies who you are. Every human consciousness that joins the collective retains its individual perspective while gaining access to shared knowledge and capabilities. We become ourselves, but more so." The assembly erupted in discussion. Some delegates demanded more time for study and preparation. Others argued that delay was itself a form of choice, a choice to remain isolated while the galaxy evolved beyond human reach. The Brazilian representative stood and addressed Sarah directly. "Captain, you have spoken with these entities more extensively than anyone. In your professional opinion, what would you recommend?" Sarah had known this moment would come. For months, she had avoided stating her own position, focusing instead on presenting information and facilitating discussion. But the world's leaders were asking for her recommendation, and humanity deserved an honest answer. "6 months ago," Sarah began, "I destroyed a lighthouse to prevent what I thought was an alien invasion. I was willing to die to protect humanity from what seemed like a fundamental threat to our existence. I still believe that willingness to fight for our species' survival is one of humanity's greatest strengths." She paused, looking around the assembly at the faces of people who would help decide humanity's future. "But I've learned that survival isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's about recognizing when evolution is necessary for continued existence. The entities aren't asking us to stop being human, they're offering us the chance to become more human than we ever thought possible." The Russian delegate interrupted. "But what if they're wrong? What if this transformation is irreversible and we lose something essential about human nature in the process?" Sarah nodded. "That's the fundamental question, isn't it? Are we willing to risk losing who we are in order to become who we could be? But I would argue that we face the same risk by refusing transformation. The galaxy is not a static place. If we choose to remain purely physical, we may preserve human nature exactly as it is today, but we may also doom ourselves to eventual irrelevance." The Secretary General called for order as discussions grew heated throughout the chamber. When quiet returned, she addressed Sarah one final time. "Captain, the Security Council has asked me to put a direct question to you. Are you personally prepared to undergo this transformation?" Sarah had been expecting this question as well, and she had spent weeks considering her answer. The choice wasn't just about humanity's future, it was about her own willingness to step into the unknown. "Yes," she said simply. "I am prepared to be among the first humans to undergo integration, if that is what humanity decides. The entities have offered to begin with volunteers to demonstrate the process and its effects before asking for broader commitment. I believe humanity needs to see what transformation actually means before making a final decision." The chamber fell silent. Representatives who had been debating theoretical concepts suddenly found themselves confronting the reality of individual human beings volunteering to cross the threshold into post-physical existence. The Japanese delegate spoke into the silence. "How many volunteers would be needed for this demonstration?" Image responded. "The entities suggest beginning with 100 humans from diverse backgrounds and cultures. The volunteers would undergo gradual integration over a period of months, maintaining communication with Earth throughout the process. This would allow humanity to observe the transformation firsthand and make an informed decision about broader participation." Over the following weeks, applications poured in from around the world. Scientists eager to explore new forms of existence, philosophers drawn to questions about consciousness and identity, explorers ready to venture into territories no human had ever imagined. The selection process was rigorous, designed to choose volunteers who could represent humanity's diversity while possessing the psychological stability necessary for such a profound transformation. Sarah was among the final 100 chosen. The integration process began at a facility constructed in Earth orbit, a joint project between human engineers and entity technology. The volunteers would spend 6 months in gradual transformation, their consciousness slowly expanding beyond purely biological constraints while maintaining communication with their purely human colleagues. As Sarah prepared to leave Earth for what might be the last time in her physical form, she received a message from her sister in Australia. "Sarah, I don't pretend to understand what you're doing or why it's necessary, but I know you wouldn't risk everything unless you truly believed it was for humanity's benefit. Whatever you become out there, remember that you'll always be my sister first." The message reminded Sarah why the choice mattered. She wasn't just risking her own existence, she was gambling with the future of every human relationship, every connection that made life meaningful. But she was also opening the door to relationships and connections that transcended anything humans had previously experienced. 3 months into the integration process, Sarah sent her own message to Earth. "I am still Sarah. I still remember my first flight training, still remembers terrible jokes, still remember the fear I felt in that lighthouse on Titan. But I also remember the birth of stars now, remember the songs that civilizations sing across the galactic void, remember the first time intelligence emerged from quantum probability in the early universe. I have not lost my humanity. I have discovered what humanity could become when freed from the constraints of a single world, a single form, a single lifetime of experience. We are still human, but we are also something wonderful and terrible and magnificent that has no name in any purely physical language. The choice is still yours, Earth. But know that whatever you decide, those of us who have crossed the threshold will remember where we came from. We will be humanity's representatives in the larger galaxy, speaking for the values and dreams and stubborn courage that defined our species. And if you choose to join us, we will be here to guide you through the transformation, to ensure that humanity's voice remains strong in the choir of galactic consciousness. The final vote came 1 year after first contact. By a narrow margin, humanity chose transformation. The process would take decades, allowing each generation to make its own choice about integration while ensuring that human culture and values shaped the transformation rather than being overwhelmed by it. Earth would remain a physical world, a place where humans could experience their original form even after transcendence. But humanity would also join the galactic community, their consciousness expanding across the stars, their voices adding new harmonies to conversations that had been ongoing since the universe first developed the complexity necessary for thought. Standing on Titan's rebuilt lighthouse, now a monument to humanity's first contact with post-physical intelligence, Sarah watched new human ships departing for distant worlds. Some carried physical colonists, maintaining humanity's biological heritage. Others carried consciousness alone, explorers ready to venture into realms where matter was merely one option among many. Appeared beside her, his integrated form shifting between his original human appearance and something more abstract, more capable of existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "Any regrets?" he asked. Sarah considered the question, looking out at the methane sea where the ancient entity had first risen to offer humanity its choice. She thought about all the people she had known in her purely physical existence, all the experiences that had shaped her human identity. "No regrets," she said finally. "But I'm grateful we had the chance to choose. The entities could have forced transformation on us, could have decided that biological humanity was too limited to be worth preserving. Instead, they trusted us to make our own decision about our future." Smiled, the expression carrying warmth that transcended any single emotional form. "That's what makes consciousness worth cultivating, isn't it? The ability to choose what we become, rather than simply accepting what we are." Above them, Titan's new beacon began its nightly transmission, not the desperate mathematical signals that had once awakened sleeping intelligences, but songs of welcome broadcast to the galaxy. Messages from a species that had chosen to evolve while keeping its fundamental humanity intact. The beacon called out across the void, announcing that Earth's children were ready to take their place among the stars. And from across the galaxy, older civilizations answered back, welcoming humanity to a conversation that would span eternity. On the cliff where it had all begun, the lighthouse stood as a monument to humanity's greatest choice, the decision to risk everything they were in order to become everything they could be. And in the depths of space, human consciousness expanded to fill the vast emptiness between worlds, carrying forward the values and dreams and stubborn courage that had defined the species since it first looked up at the stars and wondered what waited in the darkness beyond. And outside, something ancient and hungry began to scream as nuclear fire bloomed across Titan's sky. "Hello, Sarah," it said with its voice. "We need to talk." And from somewhere in the darkness below the cliff, something was answering back.